That's Nick.
And that's Joseph. And today we're here to talk about Mutt, the directorial debut of Vuk Lungulov-Klotz, which premiered at the 2023 Sundance Film Festival, and it played in Berlin right after that. It won an acting award for its lead, Lío Mehiel, and Strand releasing it on August 18th, 2023.
The premise: within the space of 24 hours, Feña is swept through the extremes of human emotion when people who seemed to disappear when he transitioned are suddenly back in his life. My pull quote for this movie is, "Mutt is an effective and compelling example of how far LGBT filmmaking has come."
Agreed.
How about you?
Mine is, while its exaggerated dramaturgy feels excessive upon close examination, Mutt is a well-performed and quietly stirring film about claiming space and being yourself.
So the story, Feña is a trans guy. He's probably like in his early 20s. Mm-hmm. So what do we know about Feña? He transitioned about a year ago. His relationship with his mother is very strained. He has a younger sister, maybe she's like 12 or 13, who he hasn't seen in a year. When Feña was Fernanda, she had a boyfriend, which is, I think, important to distinguish that, named John.
Played by Doman.
And then on this, because the movie takes place over the course of like a day and a night, like 2 days and a night. Feña's dad, who lives in Chile, who he hasn't seen in years, is coming to visit. And Feña is responsible for picking him up from the airport. So there is a segment where it gets kind of calamitous, where everything that could go wrong seems to go wrong. But what we end up seeing happen is that Feña's ex, John, he's left town. Like, he no longer lives in the area, but he's back because he's visiting his mom who's sick. And Feña bumps into him at a bar. And at first it's super awkward, but then they hook up, like they have sex. To the point where Feña's concerned about being pregnant because he hasn't been on hormones long enough to prevent that, and I'm assuming hasn't had a hysterectomy. So it's awkward. Like, John clearly feels a way about hooking up with his ex, which we need to talk more about. Then, while Feña's at work, his sister just pops up, who he hasn't seen in a year. And she's basically like, I just want to see my sibling, and life at home sucks, so you kind of abandoned me. So they sort of spend the day together. Then, after their awkward night, Feña bumps into John, and he's like, well, give me some money for some morning after pill, but also I need to borrow your car because I have to pick my dad up from the airport. Feña picks his dad up from the airport. It's awkward at first because the dad is still trying to understand his child who has transitioned.
Yeah, a lot of processing still needs to happen on his part.
Yep. Then, after Feña gets his dad home and settled, Feña goes to see John to return the car. But it's clear Feña thinks they might be sexual again because he gets all gussied up and brings a bottle of wine. They do decide to drink the wine and talk. And that's when John tells Feña how he feels about him. That it all culminates with a line that I thought was pretty powerful, where he says, people don't hate you because you're trans, they hate you because you're an effing asshole. And that causes Feña to spiral. He starts crying, he goes home, his dad is awakened and notices his child is crying. So they have a heart-to-heart. The end. So it would seem that Feña's life is better in this. Things seem to be improved.
There's a path towards reconciliation has been established. Yeah. And then also in this 24-hour period, we get various microaggressions with people that Feña comes into contact with, such as at the bank and at the pharmacy, and who in the various ways that they interact with him.
Yeah. What I meant about my pull quote is that, like, from a production standpoint, I think this movie is very clean. I like how it looks. So I was thinking, if this movie would have been made 20 years ago, then yes, obviously it's, a better produced movie. But I think also the story, it felt refreshing to see that, like even my own opinion. Like if I had seen this story 20 years ago, I think I would have interpreted Feña as like overly aggressive and angry and a little dramatic. And I still think that that performance sometimes does feel a little dramatic, but watching it today, it felt refreshing to think like, because my opinion would have been like, maybe you need to like be a little more gentle in how you deal with people, a little more forgiving. People are trying to learn, but it's 2023 and we're in this big ass city and I've already created a life for myself. We see that Feña has close friends. Like this person has done the best with what they have around them. I don't need to deal with this. Like, I don't need to talk to my mom who's not supportive. Feña and his dad have a confrontation in the car on the way back from the airport because the dad is saying all the wrong things. Talking about how, like, you were such a pretty girl, you like boys, so why couldn't you just stay a girl? Like, all these things, and Feña just lets him have it. Like, I've worked really hard to try to be okay with who I am. I don't care what you think. And if you have a problem with me, then don't even bother being around me. So it was refreshing to see that in this movie.
I think, yes, 20 years ago, this would have been a lot more rough around the edges. I feel like there would have been, on the part of a screenwriter, an attempt to explain Feña a lot more than just to me, everything about this character just makes sense. I don't think Feña is too aggressive with his father because I think anybody that's had to struggle to make it on their own way, while being put down everywhere they go. Like you're angry. It makes sense, and Feña has established a place for himself in the largest city in the U.S. And this father that's not in their life anymore wants to come in. I think that reaction makes sense to me. I don't need you to be here.
I agree. Furthermore, Feña knows his dad to a degree. We, as the audience, we don't know, but I mean, we assume that maybe he grew up with his dad. But either way, we can see that Feña's dad is more reasonable, right? So it's like, I know that you can wrap your mind around this, so stop playing games with me and talking loose and crazy. So it worked for me in that way as well, that the dad, we get a glimmer of like, you know that what you're saying is ridiculous. You just need to get yourself there, and I don't need to help you do that.
I think the third act is the best part of the film because we get those great moments with the father, who's played by Alejandro Goic, who's a notable Chilean actor. We've seen him in, we reviewed Chile 76. That came out earlier this year, but
he's in that.
Also been in several high-profile Pablo Larraín films, such as No and The Club. Also, Sebastian Silva's The Maid. If you've never seen that, highly recommended. But I really like those moments because you can see this person who is saying all the wrong things, but is also very loving towards their child and empathetic, and does come around rather fast to kind of get with the program, at least in the parameters of this film. And also the third act, I think, has some excellent scenes with John, played by Cole Doman, who, if you haven't seen him in Henry Gamble's Birthday Party, 2015 film directed by Stephen Cohen, I highly recommend seeing that. It's a really good queer film. That's a really good queer filmmaker.
So early on in the film, when John and Feña have sex, the next morning, it's clear that John has some regrets, and he says, it's very clear that he feels like he shouldn't have done this. I'm going to talk about, I think the strongest part of the story is this relationship between this guy who if we assume that he's a straight cis guy who was in a relationship with this cis woman who then transitioned, and I'm assuming their breakup was in part due to the transition. Him reconciling, because at a point, Feña asks, like, am I different to you? And he's like, well, you're the same, but different. And we see they get caught out in the rain at a point early on and run into a laundromat. John offers Feña his jacket. And Feña's like, well, can you turn around so I can take off my top? And Feña's had top surgery. And John's like, well, I've seen you naked. Well, not like this, so could you turn around? And then when Feña sees that John can see him in the reflection of like a washing machine, he gets upset. And I thought that was very interesting.
It's interesting. It's also a very erotically charged scene because that's where they start kissing. And I thought that was played very well.
Yeah.
Like there's this tension and anxiety to that scene that I don't know, I think just works and is very compelling.
I guess I could say, So I did think this movie was very good, and there's nothing really about it that I think wasn't well done per se. I think what I would have preferred, like the strongest parts of the film, I think this would have been interesting to have it just be like a day in the life of this person dealing with three different people: his sister, his ex, and his dad, and how each of them handle him differently. Because you have the sister who's young and she knows what's up, because there's a point when Feña asks his sister, "Do you know what trans is?" And she goes, "Of course I do." Like, I have a trans friend. Like, you, and I thought that was very refreshing, because it's like, you know, taking for granted that this younger person is very comfortable with who you are. Like, you're making it uncomfortable.
Yeah, because Feña goes, "Well, I'm trans," and Zoe, the sister, goes, "And?"
And yeah, she's the but then it's cool because in that same scene, the sister. So this is where I think, if there is a weak part to the film, I feel like there's this sort of calamitous sequence of things going wrong, because the sister has her period for the first time. At the same time that she's seeing her sister for the first time in a year. They get locked out of Feña's apartment. Feña can't get a car. Feña's carrying a trash bag down the steps and the trash bag breaks. Like, they go to a pharmacy to get Plan B, and the pharmacist is being really super awkward and inappropriate. Feña goes to a bank, and the teller's saying, "Well,
"You can't cash your check."
which I thought was the most awkward scene, because Feña acknowledges that his boss knows that he's transitioned, and he just sometimes forgets to put the name, but I usually put it in the ATM machine. That was a little clunky. Then at one point, in the same little 20-minute sequence, Feña hops the turnstile for the subway and bumps his head, and he's all bloody. There's a lot going on.
There is too much going on. It almost seems like it's Feña and the no good, terrible, very bad day.
Yes, that's what I would have said.
But at the same time, I think it's maybe biting off more than it can chew, but it's also showing how a trans person is navigating this world and can get hemmed up really very easily, is vulnerable in all these situations, and how many trans people, it's hard to change your name legally. It's expensive. You might not have the means to be able to do so, and it's a long process.
Sure.
So a lot of trans people are tied to their dead name, and then you have people like the boss that's not putting the correct name on the check, and the bank teller that's not going to be understanding or forgiving about that. And legally, they don't have to be. So I get...
It's valid, yeah.
It's all valid. It just, it does seem like a lot, but I think that is... a lot of films set over a 24-hour period are tasked with entertaining us, right, and keeping the energy flowing. And, you know, sometimes the suspension of disbelief is this person's just having a terrible, horrible, very bad day.
I thought what would have been made for a really good story is focusing more on John and how he's reconciling, because Feña does sort of intimate, like, are you uncomfortable because you feel like you're having sex with a man? And I thought, can you think of a film that sort of tackles that subject matter of, like, there are films or documentaries where, like, someone stays with their partner who's transitioning, but this idea of this, like, straight cis guy, I'm assuming, being in a relationship with a woman who then transitions to being male, and, like, reconciling how he feels about that, and then ultimately being attracted to that person. I thought that was the most fascinating part, and then it all sort of being flipped upside down, because really the issue is John just doesn't like Feña. Feña's an asshole to him. And so it's like, it's not about you being trans. It's just like, I just don't like your ass anymore, is the sense I got.
It is and isn't about Feña being trans, because when you are just, you're being your authentic self, there's a lot of self-centeredness in that, because you are still establishing your way. And yeah. I think if you're not ready to deal with that, or kind of give somebody that space to become themselves and then be able to look outward again. But there are other films that deal with that. It's just we have such little trans representation. But the one thing that I kept thinking about is this 2003, I think it was made for HBO film, Normal, starring Jessica Lange and Tom Wilkinson, where he plays a blue-collar worker, and they're married for decades, and decides that he's trans, and starts transitioning into becoming a woman. And then his wife, Jessica Lange, is left behind, like, well, what does that mean for me?
Right.
Does that make me a lesbian? And I think in that film, which I'm pretty sure is based on a true story, I'd have to read, I didn't double-check that, but she stayed with him. And yes, I find that fascinating, and I think that is what's... we're living in a world where we're ordering people like food off of apps, and we might be a little surprised about how attracted we are to people based on them as people and not necessarily what's going on elsewhere.
Yeah. I found myself more interested in John and like his story and how he's feeling. But that being said, I think the character of Feña is well done.
Yes, and I do, that kind of explosion that he has at the end is done very well because it's very, it happens very subtly, like the shifting. Because the reason that they hook up is that they're both on drugs.
Yeah, they've been doing cocaine before.
So, there's that euphoric feeling that accompanies that. I don't know, I think all of those little key elements, which are the most important parts, make sense.
I only have a few more notes. Well, the film ends with Feña's dad sort of expressing love and care, and then it ends with him saying, "My guy." So I thought that was nice.
That's nice.
Also, Feña reminds me of a comedian named Molly Merkel who has a character named Janice. And I would encourage people to look up Molly Merkel Janice because I think it's a really funny, just the aesthetic.
Oh no, her little bit is funny.
Yeah.
In the first time we saw her unawares, I assumed that the characters that she's portraying is homeless, but I was
and
like,
schizophrenic.
But I was like, is this person okay?
It's not shade against the Feña character. They
no.
just look very similar, and so it reminded me of that. Also, when Feña goes at the end of the film to go see John to return the car and have wine, John pours that wine into jars, like glass, like reused glass jars. I hate drinking out of jars.
Mason
Just
jars.
so everyone knows, don't invite me over and you have those on with this, like how the top has ridges, and then when I drink from it, it always dribbles. Oh, I hate it.
I know.
What would you give this movie?
I would give it 3 out of 5.
I would give it 3.5 out of 5. Anything else?
No.
Hit the thanks button. Listen to our podcast. Bye.